Humility is a Christian virtue. And one of the things that you might want to be humble about is your own understanding of the doctrines that you're criticizing. You have had great fun with what I would consider cartoon versions of just about all the... What? Is this on? Hello. Now is it on? And it wasn't. Okay. Sometimes the way people understand things is by rewriting them in their own terms and then saying, oh, well, what a crazy idea that is. And of course, if they haven't done justice to them in their own terms, then that's pretty crazy. So what we've seen here, I think, is a number of occasions in which... try another microphone. Boy, the yeah, that's better. We've seen a number of caricatures lambasted, a lot of fun had with them. I don't know which ones to start with. Well, let's talk about the Big Bang. For Dinesh, this is proof of God's existence. Remarkable how a creator comes into this picture. I don't see that space and time in our universe started, what, 14 billion years ago? Yeah, that's right. But not that God created space and time. That the universe, by having the Big Bang, created space and time. Now, if you want to say, well, the universe can't create itself, well, God can't create himself either. I don't know where you get the other principle that there has to be a creator, unless you're just falling back on the trickle-down theory of goodness again, right? You just don't see how something this wonderful could exist unless there was something more wonderful still that created it. That's the pre-Darwinian hunch, and I think it's just a hunch and you have nothing going there. How did the universe get here? No, that was the question he had. It's the other way around. How did we get here in this part of the universe? Well, we couldn't be in a part of the universe that had other laws, and as far as we know, there may be lots of other universes in which wandering creatures like us couldn't exist. And so the fact that we exist in a wonderfully fine-tuned universe is nothing that requires the explanation of a brilliant creator. We couldn't exist in any other universe. Here we are. This is simply a cartoon version of the anthropic principle, and there's a lot of literature out there. I'm not going to try to give a physics lecture here. Neither you nor I are physicists or cosmologists. If Alex Vilenka were here, I'm sure he would be willing to fill in that detail. More important to me, I think, is, let's see, all of these different points. Well, let's go back to your opening numbers of atheist murders. Yes, the number of people killed by atheists in the 20th century is terrible. But first of all, notice that the regimes that you're talking about were themselves sort of proto-religions. In fact, it occurred to me, let's think about Stalin for a moment. Was he an atheist? You might say, well, of course he was an atheist. No, on the contrary, I think in a certain sense, he wasn't an atheist at all. He believed in God. Not only that, he believed in a God whose will determined what right and wrong was. And he was sure of the existence of this God, and the God's name was Stalin. And he created a cult of worship and of refusal to tolerate any disagreement. And this is in fact the way religions used to start in the old days. If we look at Kim Il-sung in North Korea, I think we see a good case of that too. Oh my, there's so many points to talk about. There's so many points to talk about. You say, as if it were just obvious, that free will, choice, consciousness, intentionality, that there's no explanation of those in terms of the Darwinian picture. Well, of course, you might be right, but my whole career has been designed to elaborate those explanations, and I seem to have made a fair amount of progress. I can't, of course, hope to show you those complexities in a minute or in 5 minutes or in an hour, but for you just to assert that, of course, these things can't be explained in this way, strikes me as simply an assertion that you pull out of thin air.
Well, in your book, Breaking the Spell, Dan makes, I think, a very useful, you may say, rule of fairness. He's talking about atheism, he's talking about religion, and he basically says this. He says every time somebody accuses a religious dictator of doing something bad, all the Christians basically say, oh, but it wasn't me, it wasn't Christ, he didn't teach that, and so on. To which Dan has the following answer, which I think is worth taking seriously. He says, wait a minute. He goes, religion has got to take responsibility for the crimes committed in its name. I cite this in my book. He says if someone kills in the name of Allah, Islam's going to have to take a bit of responsibility for that. If Hamas or Hezbollah does it, you can't just say, well, they weren't being true Muslims. They think they were. And I agree with Dan's principle. But then I notice that when it comes to atheism, he tries to dodge it. Because if it is true that the ordinary mild-mannered Christian has got to take some responsibility, even for the Salem witch trials, even for the Inquisition, even for the Crusades, then I maintain that the ordinary mild-mannered atheist at the Tufts Free Thought Society has to take some responsibility for Pol Pot and for Stalin. These guys were committing their crimes in the name of it. You can't just say, well, they sort of resembled religion. Now you're basically saying religion must take the blame not only for what's done in its name, but also for what's done in the name of atheism. This is a totally bogus form of reasoning. So, let me turn, so if the Christians have to take responsibility for Torquemada, poor Dan's going to have to take some responsibility for Stalin. That's just the way it is based on his principle. Now, let's talk about the Big Bang. Very briefly. I don't want to get into a debate about physics. I just want to say something very simple. All of nature came into existence at a certain singularity. Before that, one may say there was no nature, so there can't be a natural explanation for the Big Bang, because the Big Bang encompasses all of nature. So here's my argument. It's very simple. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning. The universe has a cause. That cause we call God. That's my argument. Now, fine-tuning. Here is where we get into what I want to call faith-based atheism.